One of the top groups, coast to coast and border to border, never to be forgotten, the Bobby Fuller Four.
The cause of Bobby Fuller's death, at the age of 23, has remained a mystery for over 50 years. Fuller led his group, the Bobby Fuller Four, to a top 10 hit with their cover of I Fought the Law. Fuller was on the brink of stardom when his body was discovered in the front seat of the family's car, which was parked here at the Hollywood Franklin Park when it was just a dirt lot. Fans still debate whether the rising star committed suicide, died accidentally, or was murdered. This is Dead in Hollywood. Let's go behind the sign.
You know what I mean? We got these boys here from El Paso, Texas. They got a song called I Fought the Law and the Law Won. We'll see you. The Bobby Fuller Four.
By the time Bobby Fuller was 20, his songs were being played on the local radio stations in El Paso.
They said he'd have been like Elvis Presley. Everybody that knew him would describe him as a musical genius.
Both Fuller and his younger brother Randy were musicians. When Bobby wanted to start his own band in 1962, he immediately recruited Randy to play bass. Despite an ever-changing lineup to the Bobby Fuller Four, Randy and Bobby Fuller were the two consistent members. Randy would later recall his older brother catching him huffing gasoline as a teenager in the family's garage on Album Avenue. Fuller scolded Randy, warning him of the dangers of lead. Fuller carved out a unique sound for himself, blending southern styles and drawing heavily on the stripped-down, raw, hard-on-sleeve rock and roll of fellow Texan Buddy Holly, who himself would die tragically in a plane crash at the age of 22.
We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin. 3 young singers who soared to the heights of show business on the current rock and roll craze were killed today in the crash of a light plane in an Iowa snow flurry. The singers were identified as Richie Valens, 17, Buddy Holly, 22, and J.P. Richardson, known professionally as the Big Bopper. The aircraft chartered from the Dwyer Flying Service crashed near Mason City.
Fuller idolized Holly, believing that the only way to accomplish whatever Holly had accomplished was to be as much like Holly as possible.
Buddy Holly was his god, and he wanted to play like Buddy Holly. And I was constantly saying, no, don't do that, because you are Bobby Fuller, you have your own talent. We were at odds sometimes in actually making the music, the record.
By 1965, burning ambition drove Fuller west to Los Angeles in the family's blue Oldsmobile, the very car he'd be found dead in less than a year later. The band arrived in LA with stars in their eyes. They were accompanied by Fuller's mother, Lorraine. I mean, it was her Oldsmobile after all. The band and Lorraine crammed into a small apartment here at 5955 Carlton Way. I love the image of this middle-aged housewife driving from El Paso, Texas to Hollywood, California to move into this tiny apartment with her son and his rock band. And this was their view when they moved here, the Hollywood sign. A year later, Lorraine would be the one to find her son's body in her car. But this wasn't the first time she lost a son. Her oldest son, Jack, met an unfortunate end 4 years earlier. Bobby Fuller's half-brother, Jack, was carjacked and brutally murdered. When Jack didn't come home in the morning, Lorraine knew something horrible had happened to her eldest son. Lorraine had been shaken to her core, so much so that she had a complete and total breakdown, and the family got her electric shock treatment, something they deeply regretted. LA was going to be a much-needed escape for Lorraine, and for her 2 sons. Once in LA, the Bobby Fuller Four shopped their demo around, and eventually signed with Bob Keene's Delphi Records, which was located here on Selma Avenue in the heart of Hollywood.
He was a young, very talented young man from a little town in America. And he came up to the big city, and it killed him.
In 1958, Keene discovered Richie Valens. Unlike the rest of the major labels in Hollywood, Delphi had an open door policy. Anybody with music that they wanted to release could show up to the Delphi offices, and most of the time Bob Keene would listen to the demo right then and there. And soon Keene was booking them all over Los Angeles. The formidable live group wowed the Hollywood music scene. The Bobby Fuller Four headlined PJ's, LA's first discotheque. The club was known for its deep ties with the Chicago mob, The Outfit, which found Hollywood's glitz and glamour appealing.
It's party time again. Yes, party time in Hollywood, and the tone of this party is right up to date. And what better place than PJ's, one of the swingingest clubs in Hollywood history.
PJ's paved the way for new dance clubs like Whiskey A Go Go on the Sunset Strip. The goal was to create a late-night spot that became the destination when all the other nightclubs closed for the night. The clientele was a mix of celebrities, crooks, mafia dons, gamblers, call girls, strippers, and my boss, who, when he found out I was researching PJ's, told me how he met Liberace one night at the club. But it was the nightclub performers that kept everyone coming back, especially the Bobby Fuller 4. They were on fire at PJ's. It's even said that Charles Manson stopped in PJ's just to see the Bobby Fuller 4.
Yeah. Anyway,
their opening night at PJ's was a resounding success. Phil Spector even sent Fuller a telegram congratulating him on making his early mark in Hollywood. King warned Fuller to stay away from Spector, but maybe it was King that Fuller needed staying away from. Two other iconic singers who had worked for King both died under tragic circumstances. Ritchie Valens in the before-mentioned plane crash, and Sam Cooke. On December 11, 1964, 2 years before Fuller's death, soul pioneer Sam Cooke stopped in at PJ's with Elisa Boyer, a 22-year-old aspiring singer/call girl. Cooke brought Boyer to the $3 night Hacienda Motel here on South Figueroa Street. The motel is now a parking lot for the Numero Uno Marketplace. Boyer's story is the only account of what happened between her and Cooke that night, and her story has long been called into question. It's believed that Boyer slipped out of the motel room with Cooke's clothing to rob him, rather than to escape an attempted rape.
He pushed me on the bed, and he says, "Well, we're just going to talk." I knew that he was about to rape me, so while he was in the bathroom, I picked up my clothes, my shoes, and my handbag. I opened the latch, and I ran out.
Fans contend that there was a conspiracy to murder Cooke, mainly due to the perceived lack of an investigation. Cooke had been shot in the chest by the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin, after he allegedly forced his way into her office and started grappling with her.
And he grabbed both of my arms and started twisting them and asked me where was the girl. I started kicking, and he maybe have a bite, I don't know, but I tried to bite him through that jacket.
You tried to bite Mr. Cooke?
Yeah, I was fighting, scratching, biting, and everything. Finally, I got up and grabbed a pistol. I started shooting.
And how many times did you fire this pistol?
3 times.
Did you know you struck Mr. Cooke?
Yes, because he said, "Later you shot me."
It would later be revealed that Franklin was an ex-madam working at a motel known for prostitution. Boyer would later be arrested for prostitution, and in 1979, she was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of a boyfriend. Many wonder if Bertha Franklin and Elisa Boyer were working in tandem the night Cooke was killed.
Oh, the change gonna come. Oh, the change gonna come.
Following a rushed investigation into the incident, the shooting was ultimately ruled as a justifiable homicide. Cooke was buried at Forest Lawn in Glendale on December 19, 1964, in a private section of the cemetery called the Gardens of Honor. Besides the Bob King connection, both Fuller and Cooke spent their last night alive with a call girl from PJ's. Around 1 a.m. on the night of his death, Bobby Fuller received a phone call from a girl named Melody.
My relationship with Bobby primarily was to watch him. Homicide detectives questioned me about stuff, but all they were interested in were drugs. And I started to get angry with him, and I kept saying, he was not a suicide. Why don't you find out?
For some reason, the cops didn't want to find out. After a grueling 3-month tour, the Bobby Fuller 4 were on the verge of breaking up when they should have been making it big. Frontman Bobby Fuller was tired of touring. He wanted to spend more time in the studio recording his own songs instead of being forced by his record label to record other people's songs. Fuller was unhappy and felt misunderstood and abused by his record label, who viewed him as their golden goose. But was he so unhappy that he'd take his own life? His friends and family believed something more sinister was at play.
Bobby Fuller and Band perform Nervous Breakdown and other great songs in Show and Dance. Admission, $1.
Things had been changing within the band for a while now, and they all knew it. They just didn't want to admit it. Fuller's bandmates felt like Delphi label boss Bob Keane was placing more and more emphasis on Fuller as a solo entertainer, and they felt slighted. And can you blame them? Because that's exactly what was happening. Fuller and his brother, the band's bass player, came to blows in New York while on their ill-fated final tour. Randy had walked in on a private meeting between Fuller, Bob Keane, and Morris Levy, the godfather of the American music business. Levy had an exclusive distribution deal with Delphi and had ties to organized crime. Upon leaving New York, the band played their final shows to small audiences at San Francisco's Drag-On a Go-Go. Back in LA, bandmate Jim Reeves announced that he had received his draft notice. Drummer Dalton Powell informed the group that he wanted to go back to El Paso to be with his wife and children. The bickering and fistfight stopped, however, when the band realized that there was no point in fighting if the breakup was inevitable. Bobby Fuller scheduled a 9 a.m. meeting with Bob Keane at Delphi Records on July 18th. He was planning on announcing the breakup of the band, as well as parting ways with the record label Delphi. But by 5 p.m. that exact same day, Fuller would be found dead. Even with all the turmoil of the past several months, Fuller still managed to lead the band to their first and only top 10 hit with the cover of the Crickets' I Fought the Law. In 1959, the Crickets released I Fought the Law after Sonny Curtis joined the band, taking the place of the late Buddy Holly on guitar. If Holly had lived, the Crickets version would have been a huge hit for the band. But it wasn't until the Bobby Fuller 4 covered it that the tune really took off. In 2004, Rolling Stone ranked the Bobby Fuller 4's version as one of the 175 greatest songs of all time. That same year, Fuller's version was named one of the 500 songs that shaped rock by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So 6 months after the song charted, Fuller was found dead from asphyxiation in his mother's Oldsmobile, which was parked right here. So this hotel, the Highland Gardens Hotel, used to be the landmark motor hotel. And this is the hotel where 4 years after Fuller would die, Janis Joplin died in room 105, right up there. And she bought heroin on that street corner, the same street corner as the vacant lot. Joplin then overdosed in her room 105. You can actually stay in the Janis Joplin room, but just be sure to cross the street and pay your respects to Bobby Fuller, who died not more than 250 feet away. Both future rock stars traveled from Texas to Hollywood the same year, and both would die unexpectedly in their prime. Okay, so I can't find, if I wanted to find out an availability?
Because this has been open for, that closed for during the pandemic.
Would I be able to take a photo of a room number? Yes, where Janis Joplin died, room 105. I would just quickly take one photo, and I'll come right back up.
This is closed for public, everyone,
Could I give you my camera? Could I give you my camera? I'll give you $20.
Oh.
I get it, thanks a lot. Great, thanks. I tried. Fuller's road manager, Rick Stone, was staying here at Fuller's apartment along with Lorraine, Fuller's mom, who had just arrived from Washington. She was going to spend a few days with her sons. Those who hung out with Fuller in his last day all say the same thing. He was cheerful and relaxed. He was even excited about buying a Corvette that Monday afternoon after his meeting at Delphi. Oh yeah, we're in. I've been trying to get inside Bobby Fuller's building for the past month. And that was easy. I was stressing out all day today because I thought, I'm not going to get inside. Okay, so we're in Bobby Fuller's apartment building and we're heading up to the 3rd floor to apartment, let's see, I think it's 317. It should be down here. You watch, it might not even exist anymore. Well, no, not this. Oh, it might be. It just goes on and on and on. There are no numbers. Oh, 319, 318, 317. So this was Bobby Fuller's apartment. He lived here for about a year before he died. On the evening of the 17th, Fuller and Stone were hanging out with 2 girls in Fuller's living room. It was Sunday night, and Fuller was feeling pretty good. He was on his 5th or 6th beer by this point. The girls left around 11:30, and according to Stone, around 1 a.m. on the 18th, Fuller received a phone call from Melody and drove over to her place to score some LSD.
That day, rather, before he died, he told me that they were going to go to a party that night and take LSD.
20 years later, Melody Dawson would come forward, admitting that she had seen Fuller in the early hours of July 18th, and that Fuller had received a phone call from some people from New York. When he hung up the phone, he left immediately, telling her that he had to go meet up with some strange people.
Are you asking me if I think that somebody killed him? It didn't happen out there in his mom's car. He was put in that car with the gasoline.
Melody was from Chicago and worked at PJ's, supposedly as a call girl. Melody hung out at PJ's with Larry Nunez and his wife. Nunez had ties with the Chicago mob and ran a shady exporting business down in Long Beach. Larry Nunez was Delphi's money man, and a shady one at that.
Anything that pertained to money was all in Larry's name.
Melody had been tasked by Nunez to keep tabs on Fuller. She admitted it 20 years later.
My relationship with Bobby primarily was to watch him and talk to him. I was like the go-between to talk to Bobby and see what was on his mind, what bothered him and stuff like that.
So why did Nunez want to keep tabs on Fuller, other than the fact that Fuller was Delphi's golden goose? Were Keene and Nunez aware of Fuller's intention of leaving Delphi Records? Shortly before Fuller's death, Keene had the band insured for $100,000. Fuller was insured separately for $800,000. Sometime after 1 a.m., Fuller arrived home before excusing himself to go hang out with the building's manager in his downstairs apartment. Before leaving, Fuller spoke with his mom, Lorraine, and to her, he seemed to be in a good mood. Fuller was about to embark on a journey that was sure to make him a household name. Lloyd Singer, the apartment's building manager, was the last person to admit to seeing Fuller alive. According to Fuller's autopsy report, he shared a few beers with Lloyd at around 3 a.m. Lloyd told police that Fuller was in good spirits when he left. Back in Fuller's apartment, Rick Stone was sleeping on the couch, and around 2:30 in the morning, he heard a strange sound, and he assumed it was Fuller leaving, so he just went back to bed. Lorraine, Fuller's mother, heard the same sound and assumed the same thing, because they were all night owls, and Fuller usually left in the middle of the night to go grab a late-night snack down on Hollywood Boulevard. Stone was shaken awake on the couch in the morning by Lorraine. Fuller hadn't come home, and she was starting to freak out. It was happening all over again. Another son was missing. After being awoken by Lorraine, Stone went out onto the street to look for the family's Oldsmobile. And this apartment building right here was not here at the time, so Fuller's apartment, which is 2 doors down, had basically an unobstructed view of the vacant lot at the time. Stone wasn't too worried. He was sure Fuller was going to show up for their 9 a.m. meeting at Delphi Records. Because, you know, after all, Fuller was going to break up the band and end their working relationship with Keene. But when Stone showed up at Delphi Records, Fuller was nowhere to be found. Fuller's apartment building was almost directly behind Grauman's Chinese Theater and the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It was a short drive from Delphi Records on Selma Avenue to the Mediterranean Apartments on Sycamore Avenue. Around the same time the boys in the band were leaving Delphi, 2 musicians from El Paso stopped by Fuller's apartment to visit their friend. So the 2 musicians pulled into the lot parked around here. They didn't notice Fuller's car. The 2 El Paso musicians walked down the street from the lot to Fuller's apartment. They entered the building and headed up the stairs to apartment 317. At the same time, Lorraine, Fuller's mother, went down the back steps to check the mill. She had been checking on the car all day. About every half hour, she was coming down from her apartment, walking the lot, no car. And then all of a sudden, a little after 5, it magically appears. As she was checking the mill, she looked down the street at the lot and immediately recognized the Texas plates in the car belonging to the El Paso musicians. Next to it was her Oldsmobile. So Fuller's car was found a little after 5 p.m. in the southeast corner of the park when that park was just a dirt lot. So Lorraine comes running from the apartment down the street, gets to the car, opens the car door, and there he is.
My mother went to her grave with a broken heart. Now I've the burden moved from her onto me, and I hurt every day.
Fuller sitting slumped over on the seat with his hand on the keys that were in the ignition as if he was trying to start the car. With his right hand, he was holding a hose that was connected to a can of gasoline that had tipped over and landed on the floorboard. So if you believe his death was an accident, then he was sitting in his car huffing gas and he passed out and the can of gasoline tipped over. If you believe that it was suicide, then he was sitting in his car sniffing gasoline and died that way. Or if you believe that he was murdered, then the gasoline was just a red herring and it was placed in the car to make it look like a suicide. But for me, that doesn't explain why he was completely doused from head to toe in gasoline if he was trying to kill himself. It just doesn't make sense. And when his mother and Rick Stone found Fuller, he had burn marks and bruises all over his body that were not listed in the autopsy report. Newspapers splashed suicide stories the following day. Lorraine had told police that her son had been depressed, and police took her response at face value and promptly penciled in a suicide verdict without so much as an investigation. Police, presumably convinced that his death was a suicide, failed to impound the car or dust for fingerprints, an oversight that enraged Fuller's friends.
The cop came up, made some remark about another rock and roller ODing, and it was obvious suicide.
The lack of investigation into Fuller's death gave off the appearance of a cover-up by the LAPD. But who was the LAPD covering up for exactly?
The cop came up, opened the door, and there was an empty can of gas there, a big can. He took that and threw it in the dumpster. At that point I said, hey, that's evidence. How do we know that he wasn't killed or murdered or something like that?
Some suggested that Fuller's death was a result of a bad LSD trip. Fuller had told Stone and his brother Randy that he was planning on tripping on LSD that night.
And I told him not to do anything that would get him in any trouble or anything, and he promised me he wouldn't.
Now get this, the medical examiner found no drugs in his system at the time of his death. It would take months to get a final formal death certificate and autopsy report, and to this day, the police records for this case are still sealed under California state law. But if it wasn't suicide and it wasn't an accident, then who killed Bobby Fuller? So what factors point to murder? Most of the evidence is purely circumstantial, but some strong physical discrepancies do exist. The autopsy report revealed that his bladder was markedly distended, meaning that he was unconscious long before he died, and his body showed advanced stages of rigor mortis, which could only mean that he died somewhere else. And 4 witnesses all told the LAPD the exact same thing, that Oldsmobile was not in the lot that entire day of the 18th. The 2 El Paso musicians who pulled into the lot at 5 p.m. swear that the Oldsmobile was not there when they arrived. The police even had the musicians retrace their steps. It took them 3 minutes to get from the lot to Fuller's apartment and back to the lot, where they found Lorraine, Fuller's mom, who at the time had just discovered her son's body. A narrow gap that officials never disputed, but they also never attempted to explain. The bizarre twist clearly creates a dilemma. If Fuller was murdered, why would his killer risk detection by bringing his body back to the lot? And if he committed suicide, who drove him home?
There were a lot of stories about maybe I did it, maybe his brother did it, maybe, it was all that kind of stuff.
Let's start with the outlandish. Suspect number 1, Charles fucking Manson.
I'm not a violent human being.
Another theory is that Charles Manson killed Bobby Fuller. Jim Reese, the guitarist of the Bobby Fuller 4, claimed that Manson had come into PJ's looking for Fuller to give him guitar lessons, and when Fuller turned him down, sicked his followers on him.
Do it! Get it done! How do we do it? I don't know. I don't want to be involved in it.
I mean, I find it a little crazy that Charles Manson was wandering around PJ's looking for Bobby Fuller, but maybe he was. This is Hollywood after all. I once saw O.J. Simpson at Pink's Hot Dogs. Suspect number 2, the mob. Rumors swirled after his death that Fuller was having an affair with the mob boss's girlfriend, supposedly one of the owners of PJ's.
Oh, you're gonna... You're sick. You see what happened to him?
But everyone around Fuller seemed to have ties to the mob, and that brings me to our final suspects. Suspect number 3, Joaquin. The Delphi founder has been shortlisted as a suspect for a number of reasons. One being that Fuller was the 3rd artist under his charge after Richie Valens and Sam Cooke to die in disputed circumstances. On the morning of his death, Fuller had every intention of leaving Delphi Records in that before-mentioned 9 a.m. meeting. And let's not forget, Keane took out an $800,000 life insurance policy on Fuller a month before he died. A month! And Fuller dies on the day that Fuller was going to break up the band and leave the label? I mean, that's a pretty big coincidence, right? Suspect number 4, Larry Nunez, Delphi's money man. Both Keane and Larry Nunez stood to lose a hell of a lot of money if Fuller left Delphi. Nunez was super shady and had ties to the mob. He was the one who had Melody keep tabs on Fuller.
And Larry was my best friend.
Suspect number 5, Morris Levy, a notorious figure whose business partners and associates read like a who's who of East Coast mafia.
Federal authorities were describing you yesterday as the godfather of the American music business, the connection between the mob and the music business.
There is no connection between the mob and the music business.
Levy was responsible for hundreds of beatings, threats, and deaths.
The indictment says essentially that you and a New Jersey mafia figure arranged to have somebody beat up because they owed more than $1 million to the big record company MCA. Someone beat up, you know?
I heard he was, but I haven't seen it.
Were you responsible in any way for that?
No, sir.
And he would eventually die in prison. Levy owned Roulette Records and had signed an exclusive distribution deal with Delphi shortly before Fuller's death. Randy Fuller believed that his brother was trying to back out of a music deal at the time of his death. I think Bob Keane, Larry Nunez, and Morris Levy all three need to be looked at closer. They all had the means and the motives to kill Bobby Fuller.
Make it look like suicide.
They stood to lose so much money if Fuller left the label, and Delphi had to shut down a year after Fuller's death.
Television person and man with a horn, Bob Keane.
After closing up shop, Keane embarked on a career selling security systems, mainly to celebrities in the Hollywood Hills. He ended up cheating Randy Fuller and a bunch of other artists out of money by selling their music overseas without telling them.
A lot of people said he slumped over the steering wheel, but I don't remember that. All I remember, he was down in the seat, and I could see that part of his eyebrow was torn. And then there was a puddle of blood under his face.
Here's what Randy Fuller believes happened to his brother. Fuller was coaxed from his apartment in the middle of the night by either Melody or another call girl with ties to PJs.
He met somebody, obviously, down there.
You see, he got a phone call in the morning, and he said, "Mom, I'll be back. I won't be gone too long." He took off.
Whoever got him to leave the apartment in the middle of the night must have told him that they had run out of gas.
And to me, that's where that gas can come into the picture.
Fuller had a thing for damsels in distress, and it wasn't like he intended to go far. He was wearing his mother's slippers when he died. Wherever he might have ended up that night, Fuller was confronted by an unknown assailant. Maybe the mystery man was Morris Levy, forbidding Fuller to leave Delphi. This wouldn't be a first for Levy, or a last. Fuller would have fought back. Maybe Levy didn't intend to kill Fuller, just rough him up a little.
An accident, possibly, or a fight, something like that.
With Fuller dead, everyone stood to lose money, but instead, he accidentally killed him. And they used the gas can as a prop to make his death look like a suicide. But we'll never know for sure. Too much time has passed, and too many of the players have died. Bobby Fuller would be laid to rest on July 20th, 1966 at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. The world was robbed of a legend. If Fuller had lived, he would almost certainly be thought of now as a seminal figure in rock and roll. Fuller's legacy has largely been forgotten, but his impact is still felt to this day. Long live the rock and roll king of the Southwest.
They didn't interrogate me, they didn't interrogate anybody, as far as I know.
My mother went to her grave with a broken heart, and I hurt every day over this. Everybody that knew him would describe him as a musical genius. You know, somebody out there knows something, and I just wish I could know.